Welcome, it's Justin here. I'm an indie iOS product designer and engineer. And in today's video I'll be discussing Xcode Continuous Integration or CI for iOS using Jenkins. So let's get started. So here's what we're going to be covering today in the video. What is continuous integration? An overview of the tool chain used to accomplish continuous integration. We're going to be talking about installing Jenkins, an overview of the Xcode code signing and mobile provisioning, and this will be really important. It's a step you don't want to miss. The overview of the plugin model and then how that's used to create your first job. Of course, we'll kick off the first job with OCUnit for unit testing. We'll deploy using OTA via TestFlight, and then I'll do a quick summary and recap. So what is continuous integration? Its roots come from XP, actually, from the late 90s, and it's one of the principles, and it's all about committing small amounts of value very, very frequently. Think of it as the same thing you would do in Agile from a project management perspective, iterative process. You're doing that on the engineering side, and once you start integrating quite frequently, you get a lot of value, and some of them are static analysis, some are where you can use Clang and you can do lines of code, so developer productivity, dry, don't repeat yourself. So when they commit, are they just copying redundant code? That's going to be technical debt later on. You can also get cyclomatic complexity. You can get code coverage. How many percent of my code is covered with unit tests and TDD and peer programming? They're all part of the XP sort of the value that XP adds. When I was first introduced to continuous integration, it was in the enterprise, and the use cases are pretty straightforward. Is the build broken? And second of all, do you have a nightly and weekly build? And the purpose of this is basically to say, hey, any stakeholders, whether it's customers, testers, investors, hey, can I take a look and see the progress you made and give you feedback? But more recently, I've been using it on the consumer retail space because I was actually working on an iPad project where I didn't have access to all the physical revisions I wanted. And what I used is the automated deployment to recruit testers before I went live to the App Store. So just a little bit more housekeeping, then we'll get into it. SCM, Source Code Management, and SVN, which stands for Subversion. Subversion is a type or implementation of SCM, and there are many implementations of SCMs out there. One of them is obviously Subversion. There's Git, TFS, there's CVS, there's lots of them out there, as well as providers. You've probably heard of GitHub, Google Code, and the one I'm going to be showing in this video is Assembla, and they're all great services. Most of them are freemium business models, and you can start out, and then as your team grows and projects, you can sort of unlock them. And really, the difference is on being private or public. It all comes down to licensing. Google Code is free, but you have to be under a GPL or Apache license, meaning you got to keep it in the open source type of community. I'm using Assembla because they provide free private repositories, and it's a great service, and we'll talk more about it later. As I mentioned in the introduction, we're going to be using Jenkins as the build server, and it's the #1 build server out there, most popular, and it actually can build anything. Its roots come from the Java stack as an alternative to cruise control. The project actually started out as Hudson, so if you know Jenkins, you got to know Hudson. Due to some hardware licensing issues, they forked the project and became Jenkins. It's a plugin architecture. We'll be using the SVN, Xcode, enhanced email, and the TestFlight plugins, and we'll go into that. And this is a local build server. You can also use the Amazon cloud as well as some other providers out there like CloudBees to actually host remote. So if you have a small team and you have no infrastructure, you could have a bunch of laptops that, when they close the lid, they go cold. Your builds will continue going on as you commit whenever they commit. So that is an option out there. We'll be talking about code signing and mobile provisioning and how that fits in. Unit testing with OCUnit that ships default with Xcode 4 and higher. There's some other out there like GHUnit and Kiwi. We're not going to go into that. The deployment scenario is OTA via TestFlight. We're using Xcode 4.6 with SDK 6.1, and you will need a valid SMTP email as well. Okay, so to download and install Jenkins, we need to go to jenkins-ci.org, and we want to select the Mac OS 10 link, and we want to download the package. Package has been downloaded, and I've kicked off the installer. There's two options. One out of the box is a daemon process running under a Jenkins user. We're not going to do that, and the reason why is this was developed for Java. It's meant to be used for anything. We have some more explicit requirements due to code signing. So to keep it simple and to have success here, especially for beginners, we're going to choose the custom option. And we're going to deselect start as boot as Jenkins. And we're going to then continue the install process. And I'm going to tell you why. Okay, so our custom Jenkins installation has completed. And per the documentation, let's pull up our web interface, which is localhost port 8080, and we get a wonderful 404. This is to be expected. Remember, we installed the Jenkins install package without the daemon service running under a Jenkins user. We'll verify this by pulling up Activity Monitor, and as you can see, I'm running PHP, specifically the Zen framework. So when I search for Java, that's all I find. We need to kick off the Jenkins process, and we do that by using Finder to just kick off the WAR file or the Java Web Archive. And now that I've done that, we can see that I have the Java process name running under my user, which has access to my Xcode keychains. And when we close this and bring back the browser, now you're going to see Jenkins interface appears. But we've got a bunch of headaches now, and actually it's quite the opposite. We've kept things very simple and increased the opportunity of success. The engineers at Apple developed the iOS platform with trust right from the beginning. And it's very misunderstood, but the rules are very clear. These are the rules. The publisher must be known, and we must ensure that the publisher's apps, they haven't been compromised in any way. And by allowing the Jenkins process to run under your account, all of the code signing, which ensures that trust, we know that out of the box, it's just going to work. Typically, the developer or the team has an idea. They want to bring a product to market. You can download the SDK if you have a Mac. You can start building and running on the simulator. No code signing is required. After you start to progress, you can get into hardware capabilities that you need to test on a physical device. This includes location, it includes accelerometer, other things like that. At that point in time, the team or the developer says, okay, I need an Apple developer account. They pay their $99 part of that request, they submit their public key. They have to generate a private as well. And at this point of time, Apple builds a trust and says, I know who you are. In my particular case, Apple actually needed information from the state, and they called me and verified that I was the business owner. At that point in time, I could actually publish on a device, and the limitations are on the UUID, which is the Universally Unique Identifier. So they allow 99 installs on various devices. So there still is a trust there. When you get further along and you're ready to go to the App Store, what happens is those restrictions go away. You submit it to Apple, it goes through their approval process, and then Apple either will accept or reject the app. If they accept the app, what they will do is they will verify that you are who you are by that public key, so the trust is there. They will then unsign the app, re-sign it with their private key. The public key is known. It will go in the App Store, and then you can verify that is a legitimate Apple App Store app by verifying that app with their public key, thus closing the trust circle. Alright, I want to close out the install section by just letting everybody know there are online resources that will help you migrate the Jenkins daemon install, the first option, with the Jenkins user, copy the keychains, and then grant access to those keychains so that you don't have a build server running under your own developer or team account. Alright, so before we create our first our job, we need to make sure we have the appropriate plugins, and for this video I already have them installed, but let's take a look at them. What you'll want to do is, under available, the ones I have installed, you're going to want to search for and install. So I'm using the Xcode integration, the TestFlight plugin Subversion, and the Jenkins email extension. There's some other valuable ones. This is the dashboard that allows you to get some charts and some other views on top of things. I've also used in the past the file system. If you don't want to use a remote repository, the local file system for SCM will work pretty good for you as well. Now keep in mind, when you install certain plugins, they're going to affect the global configuration. So let's go back and look at that. So for Xcode, they need to know about the versioning tools and the run and the Xcode build. So these are by default, don't touch them, but just keep in mind when you get down to things like email, so if you have a build that's successful or broken, we want to communicate this to stakeholders, you need to provide this information. So I'm going to leave it up for a second so you guys can see my settings, but this should work for you for Gmail if you're using that. But that is not in the build, it's actually considered globally. Okay, so to create your new job, you want to go to the Jenkins Home New Job, and you want to select the Build a Freestyle software project. We're not going to be using Maven and Make, any of those, or any sort of bash script. We're just going to use the built-in freestyle project. I've already got it built to speed up this video here, so let's take a look at the details. It is using the Subversion plugin as mentioned before, so I have the path to the repository. It's a remote repository. And the build triggers, I don't have anything set right now. We're going to be kicking them off manually, but if you do want to pull the SCM, it's in cron syntax. You can click the question mark here, and it will give you the format. So for example, for every minute, this would be your syntax, and there is a space between, so let me give you the example. So this would kick off a cron job that runs every minute. If you would like it to be 5 minutes, the syntax would be this. There's examples online. For right now, we're not going to use that syntax. Xcode Plugin really is where the value's at. This does a lot of the heavy lifting. Under the covers, as you saw in the global config, it calls the Xcode build for you. We select the target. The configuration is the bug. We specify some of the version information. We're using an IPA because we're going to be going out to TestFlight. We're going to unlock the keychain. That's just a precautionary measure if you don't run this for a long time. If you don't check that and on the local user hasn't unlocked the keychain, it will prompt you. And if you don't fill that information in, the build job will fail. So you want to do that just for housekeeping here. And so that's the configuration for building the job and scheduling it. Now, I do want to bring up one point. A lot of developers will have multiple instances of the SDK and versions of Xcode. You want to make sure you use Xcode Select to make sure that you're building against the right environment. Because Xcode build requires you to select a version ever since Xcode 4.3, where they became standalone app file installs. So just keep that in mind. If you have multiple versions, you need to make that distinction right from the beginning, otherwise you can run into build issues. Alright, let's review the first couple steps of our job so far. We have our initial job set up. We're using a SVN repository, which is Assembla. We are manually going to be kicking that off. We discussed the cron syntax if you want to, create a nightly or weekly build. And we talked about using Xcode Select if you have multiple versions of Xcode, so that when the Xcode plugin calls Xcode build under the covers, that it actually builds against the correct SDK. The next step is actually using the unit tests. And so in my project, which I'll pull up in Xcode in a second, I have a project that has a target called tests. And these are my settings. I'm running against the SDK. Configuration is debug. And this is another build step after the initial build. So one of the key selling points behind using the Xcode Jenkins plugin is that it will automatically convert your OCUnit unit test results from the console into a JUnit format. Remember that Jenkins came as a fork out of Hudson, and Hudson was developed as an alternative out of cruise control in the Java stack. So prior to the plugin, you would have to write your own script to convert the console out to a format that Jenkins or Hudson would understand from a JUnit perspective. So this value is you're getting a lot for free, and you should take advantage of it. Prior to this, you would have had to use Xcode build yourself and then write a script to convert that console out into the JUnit format. The next steps we will perform will be uploading to TestFlight via the API token and team token. You can also specify build notes. The last step in our build job, we will be sending an email out on success. There are other verbs available to stakeholders saying, hey, the build has occurred and here's what's in it, and it was successful. Some of the other triggers include for failures, there's fixed, there's improvements, there's many other options, but in this particular use case, we're just going to be using success. Now that our job configuration is complete, we're ready to manually kick off our job. Remember, we did not specify in our job a cron schedule to automate that the build. So we're going to kick it off manually here. In the menu system, we want to select the build now. When I do that, Jenkins works off of a queue model, local and remote. So we essentially add a job to a queue, and that job is worked locally. If we set up a rig that was remote, then you would actually span the jobs across multiple nodes. In this particular case, we're going to build now. It will add that to the local queue. We can select the job, look at the console output. You'll see it's going through each step of the job that we configured in the previous steps, and let's just take a look at the console output for a second here. Alright, so where we are. We've went ahead and actually built the archive, and we've kicked off 2 unit tests here, and this was to create a simple family doodle, and the other one was to draw wallpaper. And both were successful, and now what we are doing is we are uploading the resulting IPA to TestFlight to distribute via OTA. This is a large application. It's right under the limit of 50 megabytes, so let's just give it a second for it to upload to TestFlight. And let's keep in mind, if this would have failed, then it would have stopped at whatever step, and you would have gotten some sort of confirmation, whether from the console or depending on how you set up your email notification to say, hey, either the build failed or the test failed or the upload failed. So you would have gotten some sort of acknowledgement during one of the steps. And my phone just buzzed, so I know that we did get some sort of confirmation. So let's take a look here. We uploaded the results to TestFlight. It did indicate the speed, which was pretty good. It is a big file. The email was triggered. It does have the link for the TestFlight app, and it does say that we finished with success. So let's take a look first at our email. And as a result, it said, hey, the build 146 of Family Doodle iOS iPad app was successful. And you can look at the console out. That's just the hyperlink of what we're looking at, so we're not going to click on that right now. But the other thing is that it did say that the test flight was successful. Let's take a look at that. So let's click on Apps and then Family Doodle. Notice 146 was our build number iPad, so let's click on that today. Let's grant build access, and then as a result you can see that we just uploaded that. If I select my user, update, and notify, we'll go back to my Gmail. It says the email was sent. My phone will probably buzz here in just a second, which it just did, and now we'll see that there is a build of my Family Doodle iPad app, version 1.0.146 is now available. We'll select that link, and if I pull this up on an iPad running iOS 4 or later, you would actually be able to install it via OTA. And this is what I was saying in the beginning, that I was able to use CI to not only have unit testing quality, but to recruit testers for various devices that I didn't have access to. Alright, so we just had a successful build running off the unit tests and then uploading to TestFlight, and then we sent email confirmation out to stakeholders saying, hey, we had a good build. So as you can see, Jenkins, the world is nice and sunny. There is a brief summary of the results. I did mention earlier that I have a dashboard. This will show you more details, especially if you have a lot more tests. It will show you trends over time of how the team is doing or the individual. Not much data here because this is just for video purposes, but you can see the value here. What I'm going to show you now is I'm actually going to close this, open up Xcode, and I'm actually going to break the build. So let's take a look at this here for a second. So in this particular case, I have the 2 tests, and these are the tests that you saw. So if I return wallpaper that is nil and I'm asserting on not nil, then essentially it will fail. So in this particular case, although this is not a real breaking change, if I would actually be messing with that logic called doodle create doodle on wallpaper, and let's say for example it did return nil, and I can build this, I need to check it in. So I'm going to use my SVN client here. I'm going to do an update against the SVN store. I'll do a commit. These are the changes I'm committing. And now that the commit has taken, I'm going to go back into the family doodle. Before I do that, let's take a look at our build here. And as a result, you can see the test result, there was no failure. You can also look at the changes. There wasn't any changes. After I run this next job, you will see the changes, and you'll see the difference on the test results. So the test results took half a second. There was 2 of them. These are the 2 tests, and they passed. So let's go kick off another job here. So the build succeeded, which is accurate because there was nothing wrong with the build, but the test will fail. Okay, so in this particular case, the build failed for the tests, and it said it recorded the test results. It did not upload anything to test result, or TestFlight, I'm sorry. And it did finish with failure, and because my verb on the email wasn't triggering for failure, my phone isn't ringing. So let's go up here and now look at our dashboard. We can see the resulting test is a failure. And let's click more. Let's click more, and as you can see, this test did fail. Alright, now as you can imagine, if I go back to the build, the latest build here, look at the revision of the details, you'll see the details of what I changed, which is important. If I come back into Xcode and I undo that logic, rebuild it, and then I come back into SVN and commit, now when I kick off that build again in Jenkins, it will schedule it on the queue, look at the output. This time it's going to pass because the builds are fine, and I'll get an updated revision. It will upload it to TestFlight, and then in my Jenkins web UI, you're going to see that the test results went from being broken to fixed. Okay, so while that build is still in its way to TestFlight, let's take a look at the test results. This time around, I did fix that, and it says that it has been fixed. As you can see, the Jenkins web user interface now shows it's partly cloudy, meaning we had a success and a failure, and we then fixed a failure. And the TestFlight interface now shows the latest revision, which is 148. Which if we click here now shows that as the latest build. So we have a success, a failure, and a success, and hence the chart there. Okay, so this concludes our video here. Let's do a quick overview of the highlights. We installed a custom install of Jenkins, keeping it very simple so that we met the iOS requirements of code signing. So we kept it a user that already had access to the keychains, which are required for iOS code signing. We then configured the plugins. Keep in mind, some of those are global. We then created our job using those plugins. We used SCM with SVN, the provider being Assembla. The Xcode plugin provided the build. We kicked it off manually, but you can configure it to run automatic via cron syntax. We used OCUnit for our unit test, and we ran them using the Xcode plugin as well. that automatically converts the test results to a unit test format that the Jenkins interface can read from. And then we ship the deployment IPA file off to TestFlight using the TestFlight plugin API, and then we sent an email out on result of a success to Gmail via the email plugin that uses SMTP. So I appreciate everybody watching, and thank you for taking the time to take a look at this video.